He thought it was just another Tuesday morning briefing. Commander Jackson leaned back against the metal chair in the operations room at Naval Base Coronado, arms crossed, that trademark smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. He'd survived 3 deployments, led countless high-risk missions, and earned the respect of some of the hardest men in the military. So when the young woman in crisp dress blues walked into the room without saying a word, just a folder tucked under her arm, and eyes that seemed to see straight through the walls, he couldn't help himself. "Hey there," he called out, his voice cutting through the low hum of conversation. "You lost. The administrative offices are 2 buildings over." A few chuckles rippled through the room. She didn't flinch. She didn't even blink. But what happened next would haunt him in the best possible way for the rest of his career. The woman stopped mid-stride, turned slowly, and met his gaze with the kind of calm that only comes from someone who's walked through fire and came out the other side holding the match. "No, Commander," she said, her voice steady but soft, like the moment before a storm breaks. "I'm exactly where I need to be." Jackson felt the first prickle of unease crawl up his spine, but pride kept him going. "All right then, ma'am, humor me. What's your rank?" He said it like a joke, like he was doing her a favor by even acknowledging her presence. The room went quiet. You could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead, the distant sound of boots on concrete outside, the shallow breathing of 30 men who suddenly realized they were about to witness something they'd never forget. But before she could answer, the side door slammed open, and Captain Raymond Callahan strode in, a man whose very presence commanded gravity. He was a legend, a Silver Star recipient, someone you didn't interrupt and sure as hell didn't disrespect. And the look on his face when he saw Jackson leaning back like he owned the place made every man in that room sit up a little straighter. "Commander Jackson?" Callahan's voice was ice wrapped in steel. "Do you know who you're speaking to?" Jackson's smirk faltered. He glanced back at the woman, then at the captain, confusion flickering across his features. "Sir, I was just—" "You were just making assumptions," Callahan cut him off, stepping closer, his boots echoing like a gavel in a courtroom. "That woman you just disrespected? That's Captain Elena Marquez, Navy Intelligence. She's been deployed in places your clearance level doesn't even know exist. She's advised 4-star generals. She's coordinated operations that saved thousands of lives. And she's forgotten more about tactical warfare than most of us will ever learn." The air in the room turned to lead. Jackson's face drained of color. He stood up slowly, his hands suddenly unsure of where to go, his throat tight. Captain Marquez still hadn't moved. She just stood there, watching him with those unreadable eyes, and somehow that made it worse. Callahan wasn't done. "She walked into this room because I asked her here. She's taking over operational oversight for the next Joint Task Force, which means every single one of you reports to her now. So, Commander, let me ask you again, do you know who you're speaking to?" The silence stretched like a wire pulled too tight, ready to snap. Jackson swallowed hard, his pride crumbling like ash in his hands. He turned to Captain Marquez, and for the first time in years, he felt small. "Captain," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I apologize. That was out of line." She studied him for a long moment, and then something unexpected happened. Her expression softened, just a fraction, just enough to remind everyone in that room that strength doesn't always have to be loud. "Apology accepted, Commander," she said quietly. "But let me be clear, respect isn't about rank. It's about recognizing the humanity in every person who puts on this uniform. We all bleed the same. We all serve the same flag. And if we can't honor that in here, we have no business expecting it out there." Her words settled over the room like a blanket, heavy and warm and impossible to ignore. One by one, The men in that room stood up straighter, not because they were told to, but because they wanted to, because they understood, maybe for the first time, what true leadership looked like. Captain Callahan nodded once, sharp and final. "Dismissed," he said, and the room began to empty in silence, each man walking out a little different than when they walked in. Jackson lingered, his hands clasped behind his back, staring at the floor like it held answers he desperately needed. Captain Marquez turned to leave, but paused at the door. She looked back at him, and this time there was something almost kind in her eyes. "Commander," she said, her voice just loud enough for him to hear, "we all make mistakes. What matters is what we do after." He looked up, met her gaze, and nodded. No words came, but none were needed. She left the room, and Jackson stood there alone, feeling the weight of a lesson he'd carry for the rest of his life. Because in that moment, he understood something deeper than tactics or training or titles. He understood that courage isn't just about facing the enemy. Sometimes it's about facing yourself. And humility, real humility, is the armor that no bullet can pierce. Outside, the California sun beat down on the base, indifferent and eternal. But inside that operations room, something had shifted. A joke had become a moment had become a lesson, and a lesson had become a story that would ripple through the ranks for years to come. Because the truth is, respect isn't demanded, it's earned. And sometimes, it takes a single quiet voice to remind a room full of warriors what strength really means. Captain Elena Marquez walked down that hallway with her head held high, not because she needed to prove anything, but because she already had. And somewhere behind her, Commander Jackson took his first real step toward becoming the kind of leader he always thought he was. The kind who listens, the kind who learns, the kind who understands that the greatest battles aren't always fought with weapons. Sometimes they're fought with words, with grace, and with the courage to admit when you're wrong. And that, more than any medal or commendation, is what makes a hero.